Hello, and welcome to this performance of Regis Campo's "Oh Sweet Kisses" for solo clarinet. My name is Mauricio Franco, and I have prepared a short analysis of the work centered around its usage of meter, rhythm, tonal centers, pitch collections, and extended techniques. These five aspects dictate the building blocks of this work and its effectiveness as a piece of contemporary music. This will include score clip inserts, small video examples, as well as some live playing to provide explanation as to the execution of the extended techniques as well as past performance interpretations. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the performance. We have now reached the analysis portion of the video. It will be sectioned as follows. Section 1 will include meter and rhythm, analyzing notation choices, and the sectioning of material based upon their rhythmic intent. Section 2 will include tonal and pitch centers, providing a macro and micro level analysis of possible keys and relationships, as well as the diatonic and/or 12-tone techniques employed. Section 3 will include extended techniques in which I will explain their usage and possible solutions to their execution. Included will also be an explanation of the differences between certain effects and how they evolve throughout the piece. This includes their relationship to the surrounding context material as well as their influence on the work as a whole. Please enjoy. Welcome to Section 1, Meter and Rhythm. Within this piece, there are 4 main rhythmic figures presented. These are the ascent, the descent, the arch, and the lopsided waltz. There is no time signature. However, there is a specified tempo marking of quarter note equals circa 116, and that the 16th notes be kept equivalent. In approaching this work, there were 2 recordings I found as performance guides, with both instances playing the descending figure significantly faster than the 16th note arch that follows. This seems as though the intention is not actually to match all 16th note passages to each other, but rather within their individual cells of music to be matched. For example, the arch figures, although slower, were consistent tempi within themselves. Throughout practicing, I found it was best to allow the momentum to build in these shorter descending passages and in the repeating instances of the lopsided waltz figures. To dial back on the momentum and gain bearing, the 16th arches force the tempo back to a rigid state. The few instances in which a slowdown occur are the fermatas, or in the material directly following the descending figures. This material continues towards a slower outcome until a more rigid figure or accelerating figure as the waltz occurs. Within the rhythmic cells, there are always pairs of eighth notes, which in performance practice should be taken as anchor points where the 116 quarter note tempo should be adhered to. This argument can be made for the dotted 8/16 figures as well, but in recordings the figure is slowed significantly. There are some outliers to this systematic approach, being the melodic material found on the final page. This form recurs following a reiteration in waltz form, and precedes the most rhythmically challenging and notationally complex passage. This difficult passage is the peak of the hierarchical, metric, and rhythmic distortions presented thus far, posing a repeated cell divided in 9. Section 2, Tonal and Pitch Centers. The first page introduces material in C and G major. The next page begins introducing F and A into the texture, but many moments center around our previous keys. This includes largely repeated sections. The third page reiterates material, but does not necessarily provide explanation as to the introduction of F and A as key centers. And it is not until the last page that we realize the usage of these keys are to introduce controversy tones. These pitches subvert all expectations and are what leave the listener with a somewhat unfinished ending, an example being the last pitch, G sharp. Overall, we are met with 4 main centers of pitch, F, C, G, and A. Ultimately, it seems an altered C major has been the basis for material with many transpositions. The beginning descending rhythmic figure is in G major, from the triad presented, then into what could be considered C major based upon an outlined pentatonic scale returning to G throughout the remainder of the second iteration of the descending section. Once the first ascent occurs, the recurring instances of structured dual tonality are established. This first one here is E flat and D major successively in the same upward run. A couple of sections later in the next arch has a C major flat 7 chord, again with a D major triad atop. The arches follow essentially the same pattern of a flat major 7 and a triad atop, possibly omitting the 5th as shown here. The relationship between the two is always a major second between the keys. For example, C and D, A and B, F and G, etc. The material on the last page seems quite the divergence. However, its basis for material is actually the initial descent figure, simply presented in a rhythmically augmented form, and transposed 2 octaves lower. The last 30-second note passage of the piece poses tonal ambiguity as an amalgam of our previously identified keys in both their major and minor forms. In summation of the material presented, it is outlining F and G major mainly. This is most likely the desired outcome of the composer, as the opening cell does exactly the same, but includes a C sharp and G sharp to leave more open-ended ambiguity. With the last pitch of the piece being a G sharp, it seems it was the intention. Section 3, Extended Techniques. The extended techniques amount to be about 6 in total. I will go over the kissing, the glissandi, pitch manipulations, and singing while playing. The kissing technique can be achieved as such, being the suction of the reed and mouthpiece with a smaller than usual amount within the mouth. This makes use of the acoustics of the instrument and the bore, making the factor of projection a slight bit more noticeable. This is probably the most important of the techniques, as it is the basis of the piece's narrative. In later occurrences, we notice more instances in which the composer requests a pitch change along with the kiss. I usually do an E to E octave. And then for the upward runs, I use larger leaps in the lower part of the instrument to differentiate pitch, but can move just one finger in the left hand and still have a noticeable difference in pitch. This may vary from instrument to instrument, so feel free to experiment. The second to last kiss, in which there is a glissando, I do not play a glissando, but instead blow while sliding the E to E octave I mentioned earlier. The kisses are meant to accentuate the formal music surrounding their occurrences, as the ending of the piece with the kiss on the palm of the hand gives the piece less self-awareness. The performer is sharing a kiss with the audience, breaking that supposed fourth wall. The next technique is the blowing with pitch technique. To practice this, I use a method of taking the top lip off the mouthpiece and playing. This establishes the airstream, now strong enough to set a pitch without sealing the embouchure completely. Now what I do to create the breath, so that I do not overexpend my air, is actually pull my bottom lip away, except for the point of contact with the mouthpiece like so. This creates a solid sound inside a cloud of air noise. This is much more convincing and will sound more controlled than simply loosening the embouchure until the breath seeps through. The instances where I would slacken the embouchure would be for pitch bends. For some notes, it is better to add fingers, as here. However, some notes make it more difficult, requiring slackening for those instances. The lowered F to raised F sharp glissando is sort of a combination of the last two techniques, in which I add fingers and loosen the pressure of my embouchure as to not cause the partial to jump a register. The fingering I use for the lowered F is this, and the F sharp is this. What I meant by jumping up is that when I play the raised F fingering, I do not get an accidental squeak. For the ending G sharp glissando, I add more slack to my embouchure as I play like this. For the singing while playing, a possibility is to do part of the circular breathing technique, in which the air escapes slowly from the cheeks after being stored. Instead of breathing through the nose, you can expel air and hum, creating the singing portion. This is an example. But instead of that technique, I believe the composer's intention was to create more dissonance. So in these instances, I like to do a growl. Either technique could be employed, so feel free to experiment. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have enjoyed today's performance presentation.